My name is Austin. I'm 38. I'm a civil engineer by trade, and my entire life, if you look at it from the outside, resembles one of my projects, a solid, precision-engineered structure of steel and concrete. I live in Denver, in a loft with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains, an eternal, unshakable reminder of forces that are far older and more powerful than any human calculation. My world is one of precise numbers, strength of materials, and blueprints. I find solace in the predictability of the laws of physics, in the way a beam bends exactly the way I calculated it to under load, in the way a foundation holds exactly the weight it should. Chaos is my professional enemy, and I've done everything I can to banish it from my personal life. My girlfriend, Isabella, is an architect. We are a perfect tandem. She creates the aesthetics, I provide the structure. Our loft is her creation: polished concrete, glass, a minimum of furniture, and a maximum of free space. There is no place for unnecessary things, unnecessary emotions, unnecessary noise. We planned our future as carefully as we designed buildings. In 2 years, a house in the foothills. In 5, a partnership in our companies. Perhaps sometime later, when all the other supports are securely in place, we will think about children. Our life was a flawless blueprint. But every structure has its weak points, its hidden tensions that only you know about. My weak point has always been Clara, my younger sister. If I am reinforced concrete, she is the melody extracted from the strings of a cello. She is 34 and has never lived by blueprints. From childhood, she was a force of nature. While I was solving equations, she was drawing. While I was studying for exams, she could play the same scale for hours, bringing it to a perfection that only she could understand. Our parents, Richard and Eleanor, never understood her. My father, a former investment banker, saw the world through the prism of stock quotes and profitability. My mother, whose life was a series of charity balls and social events, valued only external gloss and reputation. To them, I was a success, a reliable son with a prestigious profession and a 6-figure income. Clara was their eternal disappointment. A musician? Her father snorted when she entered the conservatory. This is not a profession, it is a hobby for millionaires' wives. Who will pay her bills? They paid for her education, but they did it with the air of throwing money into a bottomless pit. Despite their disapproval, Clara was successful in her own way. She played in the Denver Chamber Orchestra and gave private lessons. She wasn't rich, but her eyes lit up when she talked about music. I'd seen that light in her since I was a child, and I was secretly proud of it, though I rarely said it out loud. And then Julian came into her life. He came through like a tornado, charismatic, with a dazzling smile and big ideas. He was a restaurateur, or rather, he dreamed of being one. He talked about a gastronomic revolution, about combining flavors, about creating not just a restaurant, but an experience. Clara fell head over heels in love with him. She saw in him a dreamer like herself. They married, and soon they had Leo, my nephew, a quiet boy with Clara's huge eyes. I didn't trust Julian. Behind his shiny facade, my engineer sensed cracks in the foundation. His confidence seemed bravado to me, his plans built on sand. But Clara was happy, and I kept quiet. Their life seemed idyllic, a beautiful house in the suburbs, Leo's laughter, the sound of his cello mingling with the aromas from Julian's kitchen. And then Julian decided he was ready for the big project. He convinced Clara to invest their entire savings, mortgage the house, and open a high-end restaurant in downtown Denver. Lefemere, the Fleeting. The name proved prophetic. The first months were filled with critical acclaim and sold-out houses. Julian was at the height of his fame. Clara was beaming with pride. And then reality struck. Rent, salaries, the sky-high prices of exotic ingredients, the costs soared. The bubble burst. Everything collapsed in an instant, like a house of cards. I heard news in snatches. Clara called rarely, her voice growing quieter. I offered to help, but she refused, repeating that they could handle it. And then there was silence. A week without calls. A second. I tried to call, but her phone was switched off. Julian's, too. Anxiety, cold and sticky, began to fill my orderly world. That evening, I was sitting with Isabella in our immaculate loft. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the mountains purple. We sipped wine and discussed the new office project. Everything was as usual. Calm. Predictable. And then my phone vibrated. An unknown number. I answered. Austin. The voice on the other end was barely audible, broken as cracked glass. It was Clara. Austin, we have nowhere to go. There was such a depth of despair in her voice that all my calculations, all my plans, crumbled to dust. I jumped up. knocking over my glass. Red wine spread across the white carpet like blood. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice sharp, lacking its usual restraint. She whispered the address of a motel on the outskirts of town, in a part of Denver where decent people tried to avoid. "I'm coming," I said, and hung up. Isabella looked at me with cold bewilderment. "What happened?" she asked, looking at the stain on the carpet. "It's Clara," I said, grabbing the car keys. "She's in trouble." I didn't realize at the time that these weren't just any troubles. This was an earthquake, centered in a cheap motel, but the shockwave had already reached my loft and had just left the first, ugly crack in the flawless surface of my life. The drive to the motel took 40 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. I drove my SUV through the night streets of Denver, leaving behind the glittering skyscrapers and plunging into neighborhoods where the streetlights were dim and yellow and the buildings looked tired and abandoned. I thought about Clara. I remembered her laughter when we were kids, building pillow forts. I remembered her crying when she broke her first bow. I remembered the pride on her face the first time she walked out on stage with an orchestra. And I thought about Julian, his smug smile, and a cold, quiet rage boiled inside me. How could he let this happen? How could he let his family get to this point? The Stardust Motel was a shabby two-story building with a blinking neon sign with several letters burned out. There were a few wrecked cars in the parking lot. The air smelled damp and hopeless. I found the number I needed, 107. The door was painted a sickly green, the paint peeling. I knocked. There was silence for a few seconds, then there was a soft rustling sound and the door opened. Through the crack I saw Clara's face. She looked as if she had aged 10 years. Her fair hair, usually pulled back into an elegant bun, fell in dull strands over her face. Her eyes, her large, expressive eyes, were empty and red from crying. She was wearing a shapeless sweater that was too big for her. "Austin," she whispered and stepped back into the room, letting me in. The room was tiny and shabby. The smell of old tobacco and disinfectant had clung to the walls. The floral wallpaper was blistered and peeling in places. Leo was asleep on the old bed with the burnt bedspread. He was curled up with his hand under his cheek, and in his sleep he looked so small and vulnerable that it took my breath away. On the floor next to the bed were several cardboard boxes, all crammed with things. And in the corner, leaning against the wall, stood her greatest companion, her soul, her cello case. The dark, polished case looked in this squalid setting like a visitor from another world, like an aristocrat who had strayed into a flophouse by mistake. But even on it I noticed a long white scratch, a mark of careless handling, evidence of the chaos into which her life had descended. "Where's Julian?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from sounding too harsh. Clara shuddered and wrapped her arms around herself as if she was cold. "He left," she said quietly, looking at the floor. "Yesterday. Said he needed to think. Said he couldn't do it anymore. He left a note and $500. $500. For his wife, his son, and his ruined life." My fists clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to say something, to shout something, but I looked at Clara, at her drooping shoulders, and realized that now was not the time for anger. Now was the time to build, not destroy. We had to erect temporary supports before the whole structure collapsed completely. "Get ready," I said in an even, calm voice, the same voice I used to give orders at the construction site. "You're coming with me." She looked up at me, full of confusion and shame. "Austin, I can't." "Isabella, your house." "This is not up for discussion, Clara," I interrupted her. "You are my sister. Leo is my nephew. You are not staying here a minute longer." She didn't argue. She didn't have the strength to argue. While she changed Leo's clothes carefully, so as not to wake him, I began carrying the boxes to the car. There weren't many. All that remained of their former life fit in the trunk of my SUV. The last thing I carried out was the cello case. It was heavy, and I carried it with special care, as if it contained something fragile and alive. I placed it carefully in the back seat, fastening it with a seat belt like a passenger. Clara picked up the sleeping Leo in her arms and silently followed me. She sat in the front seat, clutching her son to her, and turned to the window so I wouldn't see her tears. The drive back was silent. I turned on some soft classical music, thinking it would calm her down, but after a few minutes she asked me to turn it off. The sounds of music that had once been her life now seemed to hurt her. When we pulled up to my house, the lights of the loft were on. Isabella was waiting. I helped Clara carry Leo, who had not woken up. We went up in the elevator, and when the doors opened into our living room, I saw Isabella. She was standing in the middle of the room, her arms folded. Her face was as impenetrable as a facade of smooth stone. Her gaze slid over Clara's confusion, over Leo's sleeping body, over the boxes I had carried in after her, and settled on me. There was no sympathy in her eyes. There was only the cold, analytical bewilderment of an architect who has found his perfect design rudely invaded, every line and proportion violated. "Austin, what does this mean?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but there was a ring of steel in it. I looked at Clara, huddled in the middle of our vast, empty space, and realized that the shockwave from the earthquake had just caused the first, most obvious collapse. The foundation of my own relationship had cracked, and I had no idea how to fix it. The first few weeks felt like a prolonged test of endurance for which I was unprepared. My loft, designed by Isabella and me as a sanctuary of order and minimalism, had become the epicenter of chaos. The space that once echoed with every step was now filled with new, alien sounds. Leo's soft cries at night, the creaking of boxes that Clara never brought herself to unpack, and the deafening silence of Clara herself, who moved through the house like a ghost. The spare room, which we used as Isabella's office, became their sanctuary, but their presence seeped into every corner. Leo's cookie crumbs appeared on the immaculate white couch. The bathroom, which once held only 2 bottles of expensive products, was now crowded with baby shampoos and tubes of lotion. One day, I stumbled upon a small plastic dinosaur that Leo had left on the polished concrete floor. I picked it up, and that tiny, grotesque figure in my hand seemed like an intrusion, a violation of all the rules on which my life had been built. Clara hardly left her room. She slept most of the day, and when she was awake, she sat on her bed, hugging her knees, staring at the wall. She hardly ate. I left a tray of food at her door, as if for a recluse, and picked it up in the evening almost untouched. Leo, who was only 4, seemed to understand that something terrible had happened. He became quiet and clung to my leg when I got ready for work, as if he were afraid that I, too, would disappear. Isabella tried to be patient. At first, she was a disciplinarian and a control freak, and she approached the situation as a temporary project to be endured with minimal losses. She greeted Clara through clenched teeth, sometimes even tried to smile at Leo. But the tension grew with each passing day. It hung in the air like dust at a construction site, settling on everything. I saw it in the way she pursed her lips when Leo accidentally spilled juice on the expensive Persian rug. I heard it in her voice when she asked me in the evenings, "Any news? Has she found a solution?" There was no solution. Clara was broken. Her world had collapsed, and she was buried under the rubble. I tried to talk to her, but she answered in monosyllables, without looking at me. I understood that she needed time, but time was a resource that Isabella and I were running out of. Conflicts began with trivial things. "Austin, I can't work from home," Isabella said one evening. "Leo is always noisy. I can't concentrate." She began working late at the office, coming home late after Clara and Leo were asleep. Our loft stopped feeling like a home. It became 2 warring camps, me, Clara, and Leo on one side, and Isabella on the other. We stopped eating dinner together. We stopped talking about the future. All our conversations revolved around the problem at hand. "Is she even looking for a job?" Isabella asked one night as we brushed our teeth before bed. "What job, Bella?" I replied, my irritation rising. "She's a professional cellist who has neither the energy nor the desire to play. Her husband left her with a child and debts. Give her time. Time." She turned to me, her eyes glittering. "Austin, this is our home. Our life. We're not a homeless shelter. We had plans." Her words hurt me because they were true. I, too, felt my life spinning out of control. I couldn't concentrate at work. I checked my calculations 3 times, afraid of making a mistake. Images of Clara and Leo haunted me. I felt responsible for them, but this responsibility was an unbearable weight that threatened to collapse my carefully constructed structure. The climax came on Saturday. I was trying to coax Leo to eat vegetable soup, and he was being capricious and smearing it all over the table. Clara was sitting next to me, staring blankly at her plate. Isabella came into the kitchen, dressed for a run. She stopped, looked around at the scene, the crying child, the dirty table, the absent mother, the tired me, and her face showed disgust. "I can't do this anymore," she said quietly but clearly. That evening, after Leo and Clara had gone to bed, we had a conversation. Or rather, it was Isabella's monologue. She was talking about violated boundaries, about how I had brought someone else's drama into our home without asking her. She was talking about how she hadn't signed up to be the caregiver for my depressed sister and her child. "I love you, Austin," she said at the end, and for the first time in a long time, there was genuine pain in her voice. "But I can't live in this chaos. It's destroying me. It's destroying us." You have to make a choice. I looked at her beautiful, stern face, and I knew she was right. I had brought a hurricane into our home and expected our walls to hold up. But I couldn't make the choice she demanded. I couldn't throw Clara and Leo out on the street. It would have been a betrayal not only of them but of myself. I can't, Bella, I said quietly. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something go out in her eyes. Hope. The future. She nodded silently, stood up, and went into the bedroom, closing the door tightly behind her. I sat in the living room, in silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I looked out the picture window at the lights of Denver at night. My perfect world, my flawless structure, had developed a critical crack in the load-bearing wall. And I knew this was only the beginning. The collapse was inevitable. The next few days were spent in a state of Cold War. Isabella barely spoke to me. We moved around the loft like two celestial bodies in non-intersecting orbits, trying to avoid each other. She left for work before me and returned after I had already put Leo to bed. The silence between us was heavy, oppressive, like a slab of concrete. I felt like I was living on a construction site after an accident, dust and debris all around, and no one knew how to begin clearing the rubble. Clara seemed to sense the tension. She became even more withdrawn, spending most of her time in her room, as if trying to become invisible so as not to cause more trouble. I tried to reassure her, telling her that everything would get better, but my words rang false even to me. How could I promise her stability when my own world was falling apart? The denouement came on Thursday evening. I came home from work tired, dreaming only of silence and a hot shower. But when I entered the loft, I was met by a scene that completely knocked the wind out of me. In the center of the living room stood two large suitcases and several boxes with Isabella's things. She was methodically and calmly packing up her life, taking it out of our shared home. She was not crying. Her movements were precise and measured, like a surgeon performing an operation. "What are you doing?" I asked, although the answer was obvious. My voice sounded muffled. She turned around. There was no anger or resentment on her face, only immense fatigue. "I'm leaving, Austin," she said. "I'm renting an apartment downtown. I can't stay here anymore." I went up to her, wanted to take her hand, to say something to convince her, but the words stuck in my throat. What could I tell her? That everything would change? That would be a lie. "Bella, please," was all I could squeeze out. "Let's talk. We can find a solution." She shook her head, and for the first time in days I saw the sparkle of tears in her eyes, which she had been trying so hard to hold back. "There is no solution," her voice wavered. "You already made your decision the day you brought them here. You chose your sister. And I understand that, Austin. Honestly, you're a good brother. You did the right thing, the way you thought was right. But I can't be a part of this. I can't, and I don't want to." She ran her hand over the spines of her architecture books, which she was carefully placing in a box. "We were building something together, Austin. We had a plan, a blueprint. We wanted to build a cathedral, and you brought chaos to it. You let it destroy the foundation. I can't build on ruins. I don't know how." Her metaphor, so close and clear to me, hit harder than any scream. She used our common language to explain why we could no longer be together. She didn't blame me. She simply stated a fact. Our structure had given way under the unexpected load. I stood there and watched her close the last suitcase. At that moment, Clara came out of her room. She saw the suitcases, saw the tense silence between Isabella and me, and her face reflected horror. She understood. "It's because of me," she whispered, stepping back against the wall. Isabella looked at her, and there was no anger in her eyes, only a kind of distant sadness. "No," she said, speaking more to me than to Clara. "It's not you. It's about choices, and the fact that some structures are just not designed to withstand certain kinds of earthquakes." She picked up her bag. "I'll call a taxi. They'll send a car for the rest of the things tomorrow." She came up to me and touched my cheek for a moment. Her fingers were cold. "Goodbye, Austin." And she was gone. The elevator door closed behind her with a soft hiss, cutting her off from my life. I was left standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by her packed things, which now seemed like alien artifacts from a past life. Clara was standing against the wall, crying quietly, soundlessly, her face in her hands. "I'm sorry, Austin, forgive me," she whispered through her tears. I went to her and hugged her. Her whole body was shaking. "It's not your fault," I said, although I didn't quite believe it myself. "Everything will be fine." But as I said those words, I looked at the empty space where Isabella had just stood and felt something inside me collapse. It wasn't just a crack. It was a complete collapse of the supporting structure. My own world, which I had so carefully built, lay in ruins. And now, standing in the middle of those ruins with my sister crying and my nephew sleeping in the next room, I had to figure out how to rebuild it all. And I had no blueprints, no plans. Just a sense of duty and a huge, gaping void. After Isabella left, the loft felt different. Empty and echoing. Her things were gone, leaving behind bright spots on the shelves and walls, like ghosts of a past life. The space that had once seemed like a symbol of success and order now weighed me down with its emptiness. I felt like the caretaker of an abandoned museum. Clara blamed herself for everything. She withdrew even more, and the guilt lay like a heavy weight on top of her despair. She tried to help. She washed the dishes, cleaned up after Leo, but she did it with an air of punishment. I knew I had to do something, get us out of this quagmire, but I was barely keeping my head above water. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could give advice or at least listen. And, as silly as it sounded, I thought of my parents. Despite our difficult relationship, their snobbery and obsession with success, they were still my parents. I hoped that the news of their daughter and grandson's utter ruin would awaken something in them other than judgment. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I was just desperate for support. One evening, after I'd put Leo to bed and made sure Clara was in bed, I went out onto the balcony, phone in hand. The cold Denver air cleared my head a little. I dialed my father's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice as businesslike and impatient as ever, as if I'd interrupted him in the middle of an important deal, even though he'd been retired for years. Austin, here. Dad, it's me, I began, trying to keep my voice even. We need to talk. It's about Clara. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could almost feel him tense up inside. What else has she done? There was no worry in his voice, just irritation. I took a deep breath, containing my anger. Her life is ruined. Julian left her. They lost their home, all their money. She and Leo are living with me now. I expected anything. Shock, questions, maybe even a hint of sympathy. Instead, I heard a heavy sigh. I always knew it would end like this, my father said. I warned her that scoundrel of a husband of hers would drive her over the edge. And she? Did she ever listen? No. Always in the clouds with her cello. I felt the blood rush to my face. Daddy, it's not about who was right. The point is that your daughter and your grandson are homeless. She needs help. Help? He almost laughed, a bitter, unpleasant laugh. She made her own choice. She married that swindler. She let him drag her into this idiotic adventure. Everyone has to be responsible for their own decisions, Austin. As an engineer, you should understand that. If you build a house on a swamp, don't be surprised when it sinks. At that moment, I heard my mother's voice in the background. Apparently, he had switched on the speakerphone. Richard, what's up? Is that Austin? Yes, dear, my father answered. Our prodigal daughter has reminded me of herself again. It turns out she's now bankrupt and living with Austin. My mother's voice came through the receiver, cold and sharp as the blade of a guillotine. Austin, my dear, I hope you know you can't let her ride on your back. It's her problem, not yours. You've built a wonderful career. You've got a wonderful life with Isabella. Don't let Clara ruin what you've worked so hard to build. The shame she's brought on our family is her shame. Isabella is gone, I said dully. She left, precisely because I couldn't throw my sister out on the street. There was silence on the other end. This time it was different, heavy, full of disapproval. My father spoke first. So she's already started to ruin your life, too. I thought so. Austin, listen to me. You've done more than you should have. You've taken her in. Now she has to pull herself together and solve her own problems. Find her a cheap apartment, give her some money to start with, and let her pull through. She's a grown woman. She doesn't need a cheap apartment. She needs a family. I couldn't hold back any longer, my voice breaking into a scream. She needs her parents. Leo needs his grandfather. Don't you understand? What we need, my mother snapped icily, is for our family's name not to be dragged through the mud because of her stupid mistakes. We can't afford to be associated with this failure. What will people say? What will our friends say? That the son of Richard Blake, the brilliant financier, married a failure? Daughter, I corrected her automatically. Clara is your daughter. She made her choice. Austin, my father finished the conversation, his voice hard as steel. She chose her path, full of irresponsibility and foolish dreams. We have nothing to do with it. And I advise you to stay away from it before you get sucked into the same hole. Don't call us about this again. And he hung up. I stood on the balcony, clutching the phone in my hand so tightly that the plastic cracked. The cold night air burned my lungs. I looked at the mountains, their dark, unshakable silhouettes against the starry sky. They were a symbol of eternity, strength, something real. And my parents, my creators, were empty, fragile structures built out of vanity and fear of other people's opinions. In that moment, I realized two things. First, Clara, Leo, and I were alone, completely alone. No help would come. Second, I was no longer just the older brother. I was the head of this small, broken family. The burden was now on me, and I had to endure it, because if I collapsed, everyone would die under the rubble. After my conversation with my parents, something changed in me. The last vestiges of naive hope evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard determination. I stopped waiting for help from outside. I realized that drowning people must save themselves. Our loft had become our fortress, besieged by a world that had rejected us, and I had to become its chief engineer, commandant, and private soldier all at once. I stopped trying to get my old life back. Instead, I started building a new one, right on the ruins of the old one. I rearranged the furniture, freeing up a large corner in the living room for Leo. I bought him a small table, a chair, and a rug with runners, on which he would spend hours rolling his cars. I learned how to cook simple children's dishes and even learned a few lullabies. My voice was terrible, but Leo didn't seem to mind. He began to smile. Sometimes he even laughed. These sounds in the empty loft were like the first shoots breaking through the concrete. With Clara, it was more difficult. She was still immersed in her apathy, but I stopped pressuring her. I was simply there. Every morning, I made her coffee and silently placed the cup on the table next to her. In the evenings, when Leo fell asleep, I sat in the chair opposite her and read a book or went over the working drawings. I did not demand conversation. I simply created a space in which she could feel safe. Her cello still stood in the corner of the living room, in its dark case with an ugly scratch. She did not touch it. The instrument that was an extension of her hands, her voice, was now silent, like her. It seemed to me that if the cello began to sound, it would mean that Clara was returning to life. But I did not rush her. The breakthrough came unexpectedly one gray November day. I was sorting through Clara's old boxes, trying to bring some order, and I came across a stack of her old music notebooks. I brought them to her. "Would you like to look at them? There's some of your sketches," I said as casually as I could. She took the notebooks without much interest, but that evening I saw her leafing through them. She wasn't playing, she was just looking at the notes, running her finger along the lines. And a few days later, a miracle happened. I came home from work and heard a sound. Quiet, uncertain, intermittent. It was the cello. I froze in the hallway, afraid to frighten this fragile moment. Clara was sitting on the living room floor, hunched over her instrument. She wasn't playing Bach or Beethoven. She was extracting strange, dissonant chords from the cello, full of pain and anger. It didn't sound like music in the usual sense. It was the raw, unfiltered sound of her soul. The melody was ragged, sad, but there was power in it. The power of a survivor. She played with her eyes closed, tears streaming down her cheeks. I walked quietly into the room and sat down without saying a word. She played until the bow froze in her hand. She opened her eyes, saw me, and was embarrassed. "This is terrible," she whispered. "No," I answered honestly. "This is real." From that day on, music returned to our home. But it was a different kind of music. Clara no longer played classical music. She composed. Every night, after Leo was put to bed, she picked up her cello and her old music books and began to create. She wrote down her ragged, piercing melodies, full of longing for a shattered past and a faint hope for the future. With each note she wrote, I saw the color return to her. Her cheeks turned pink, her eyes took on a knowing glint. Music became her therapy, her way of processing pain into something tangible. One day, she called me over and played the finished piece. It was only 5 minutes long, but in those 5 minutes was our whole story: failure, despair, loneliness, and a tiny spark of resilience. When she finished, the room was silent. "I called it Cracked Foundation," she said quietly. At that moment, I made a decision. I had always been a pragmatist, saving money for the future, for that house in the foothills that Isabella and I had planned. It was my emergency fund, my guarantee of stability. The next day, I withdrew a significant portion of it from the account. I found the best string instrument repairman in Denver and made an appointment with him. That evening, I told Clara that we needed to take her cello. "Why?" she asked, surprised. "For an inspection," I replied. "Any mechanism needs maintenance." I saw the doubt in her eyes, but she agreed. The repairman inspected the instrument. He found more than just that ugly scratch in the varnish. It turned out that careless handling and changes in humidity in the motel had slightly warped the soundboard and neck. These were microscopic changes, imperceptible to the eye, but they affected the sound, making it duller, more complex. "It can be fixed," said the master, "but it will cost a lot." "Do it," I said without thinking. A week later, we picked up the cello. It looked like new. The scratch was gone, the varnish was shiny. But that was not the main thing. In the evening, Clara picked it up again. And when she ran the bow across the strings, the loft was filled with sound, deep, pure, resonant. It was so powerful that even the walls seemed to vibrate. Clara played her cracked foundation. And now, in this music, in addition to pain, there was purity and incredible power. She looked up at me, her eyes full of tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "Thank you, Austin," she whispered. I simply nodded. I had spent part of my future fixing her past. But listening to that music, I realized that I was actually investing in our present. On the ruins of my old life, I was laying the foundations for something new. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the structure might be surprisingly strong. Repairing the cello was a turning point. It was as if Clara had received back not only a perfect instrument, but also a part of herself. She played every day, with an obsession I had not seen in her even in the best years of her classical career. She composed. Music poured out of her, filling our loft, displacing the ghosts of the past. Her compositions were like a diary. Each one told its own story, of betrayal, of fear, of maternal love, of fragile hope. I listened to them and realized that this was something more than just music. It was a testimony. A testimony that even after complete collapse, you can find the strength to create something beautiful from the rubble. One evening, as she was finishing another piece, I had an idea. At first it seemed wild to me. I'm an engineer, a man of numbers and facts. The world of art, PR, and social media was alien and incomprehensible to me. But I looked at Clara, at her shining eyes, listened to her music, and understood that this should not remain within the walls of our loft. Others had to hear it. "Clara," I said, trying to make my voice sound as ordinary as possible, "let's record one of your plays on video." She looked at me in surprise. "Why? Just like that?" "As a keepsake," I lied. "Leo will grow up and watch his mother play." She was skeptical, but I was persistent. I was not a professional cameraman, but I had a good smartphone and an engineering sense for the right angle and light. We chose a corner of the living room for filming, where the light from the panoramic window fell especially beautifully, creating a contrast of light and shadow. I asked Clara to wear a simple black dress. I wanted nothing to distract from her and her music. She decided to play Cracked Foundation. I pressed record, and the magic began. When Clara plays, she is transformed. Her body becomes one with the instrument, she closes her eyes, and it seems that the music is born not from the movement of the bow, but directly from her heart. I filmed, trying not to move, barely breathing. 5 minutes of absolute, piercing sincerity. When she finished, I could not put the phone down for a few more seconds. There were tears in my eyes. "Did it work?" she asked quietly. "More than," I answered hoarsely. In the evening, when Clara and Leo were already asleep, I sat at my laptop and watched the video again. Even on a small screen, it had incredible power. I tweaked the sound a little, cut the beginning and the end. And then, after much hesitation, I went to YouTube. I created a channel for Clara, calling it simply Clara's Cello. In the description, I wrote just a few words, "Music born from ruins." The composition Cracked Foundation. I clicked the Publish button and a blue progress bar started crawling across the screen. At that moment, I felt like a sapper planting explosives. I had no idea what would come of it. Maybe 10 people would watch the video, and that would be the end of it. Or maybe. I closed my laptop and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up feeling anxious. The first thing I did was open YouTube. The video had 17 views. Mine, I guess. And not a single comment. I felt a pang of disappointment. Well, at least I tried. I didn't say anything to Clara. The day went on as usual. And in the evening, out of curiosity, I went to the channel again. And froze. The view counter showed 12,000. There were more than 100 comments under the video. I started reading, and my heart started beating faster. "I don't know who this woman is, but she plays as if she is telling the story of my life," someone wrote. "This music turned my soul inside out." "Thank you," another comment read. "This is more than music. It's a prayer." People shared the video on social media. Some recognized echoes of Shostakovich in the melody, others, Philip Glass, but everyone agreed on one thing. It was something new, fresh, and incredibly powerful. By the next morning, the video had more than 100,000 views. By the evening, 500,000. Clara's phone number, which I had specified when creating the channel, began ringing off the hook with calls from journalists, music bloggers, and some unknown agents. Clara was in shock. She sat on the couch, staring at the view counter and couldn't believe her eyes. But how? Why? She whispered. Because you're real, I said. In a world full of plastic, people are starving for something real. And a day later, the call came that changed everything. It was a man named Marcus Vance. He introduced himself as the owner of Resonance Records, an independent label from Seattle that specialized in contemporary instrumental and neoclassical music. Miss Blake, he asked. I watched your video. About 20 times. I didn't sleep all night. I don't know if you have any more material, but if this play is not the only thing you've written, I want to offer you a record deal. Clara looked at me, her hand over the phone, her eyes filled with both horror and delight. I nodded silently. Agree. She mumbled something affirmative into the receiver. When the conversation ended, she slowly lowered the phone. They want to make an album, she whispered, as if afraid that the loud noise would ruin this fabulous moment. They want me to come to Seattle. She looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw not just life in her eyes, but triumph. She straightened her shoulders, and in that moment she was no longer the victim I'd rescued from a seedy motel. She was an artist recognized by the world. I didn't know what lay ahead for us. But I did know one thing. My crazy idea had worked. I uploaded a 5-minute video to the internet, and it, in turn, uploaded the future into our lives. The trip to Seattle was like an expedition into a new world. I took an unpaid leave of absence from work. Clara, Leo, and I piled into my SUV and headed northwest, leaving behind Denver, which had been both a crash site and a rebirth for us. Clara was silent the entire way, but it was a different kind of silence, not the silence of apathy, but the silence of concentration. She watched the landscape pass by, and I knew that new melodies were already forming in her head. Resonance Records was an old brick building in the Fremont neighborhood that locals called the center of the universe. Marcus Vance, the owner of the label, was an energetic man in his 50s with a gray beard and eyes full of youthful enthusiasm. He greeted us as if we were old friends. He hit it off with Leo right away, showing him his collection of vintage synthesizers, and then taking Clara to the studio. It wasn't just a room with equipment. It was a space saturated with music. The walls were covered with platinum records, and there was an old Steinway grand piano in the corner. The lead sound engineer, a guy named Seth with tattoos on his arms, was a genius. He understood the sound Clara wanted to achieve at a glance. The recording process of the album became a sacred rite for Clara. She worked 10 to 12 hours a day. I took on all the mundane part of our life, walking with Leo along the embankment, cooking in the small apartment that Marcus rented for us, answering the endless emails that began to arrive in Clara's mail. I became her manager, bodyguard, and nanny all rolled into one. I studied contracts with the same meticulousness with which I checked the calculations of load-bearing structures. I read every line, consulted with a lawyer via Skype, protecting Clara's interests from any possible pitfalls. I watched the transformation unfold before my eyes. Clara was blossoming. Working in the studio had given her the confidence that Julian and our parents had taken away. She would argue with Seth about the nuances of her sound. She knew exactly what she wanted. She was not just a performer. She was a creator, an architect of her own sonic world. The album was named after that first track, Cracked Foundation. It was 12 pieces, each a chapter in our story. There was Stardust Motel, full of longing and hopelessness. There was Lullaby for Leo, tender and bright. There was Talking to My Father, harsh, dissonant, full of anger. And lastly, Project Revival, powerful, optimistic, looking to the future. 2 months later, the work was finished. I remember the day Seth played us the final, mixed version of the album. There were 3 of us in the control room, me, Clara, and Marcus. The sound was pouring out of the huge speakers, enveloping us. It was so powerful and so beautiful that I couldn't hold back the tears. Clara sat with her eyes closed, a calm, peaceful smile on her face. She had done it. She had turned her ruins into a cathedral. The album's release was not accompanied by a loud advertising campaign. Marcus relied on word of mouth and music critics. He sent copies to leading publications and bloggers. And it worked. The first to explode was a review in Pitchfork, the most influential online music publication. The critic called the album a masterpiece of instrumental drama and the most honest and heartbreaking debut of the year, giving it a rare 9.2 out of 10. After that, the dam burst. The New York Times, The Guardian, Rolling Stone, They all wrote about the enigmatic Denver cellist whose music sounded like a soundtrack to the collective pain of our time. The album debuted at #1 on the classical and neoclassical charts, but, most surprisingly, it also entered the general charts, sharing space with pop stars and rappers. People bought her music. They listened to her. They felt her. Success brought new worries. Invitations to festivals, offers to write music for films, interviews. Clara, who 6 months ago was afraid to leave her room, now had to give Zoom interviews for European radio stations. I was there, filtering requests, scheduling, making sure she didn't overexert herself. We returned to Denver as different people. The loft no longer felt empty. It was filled with music, Leo's laughter, plans for the future. Clara was able to hire a nanny for Leo, which gave her more time to be creative. She had paid off all the debts Julian had left behind. She was financially independent. She was free. One evening, she came to me with a checkbook in her hand. "Austin," she said seriously, "I want to pay you back the money you spent on repairing the cello and on our living expenses these last months. And I want." I stopped her, putting my hand on hers. "Clara, I didn't lend it to you. I invested in our family. And it's the best investment I've ever made." She looked at me, and there was such love and gratitude in her eyes that I felt awkward. We had built something new. Our building was unfinished, it had some imperfections, but it stood strong. It had a solid foundation that we had laid together. And I felt a pride I had never felt in any of my other construction projects. I hadn't just built a house. I had helped build a life. It seemed that the worst of the earthquake was behind us. Clara, Leo, and I were settling into our new life, building walls, painting them in light colors. The success of the album brought Clara not only recognition, but also financial stability that she had never dreamed of. She could afford not to think about bills, concentrating on creativity and raising Leo. I went back to my job, but now something had changed. I looked at my drawings, at the perfect lines and verified calculations, and they no longer brought me the same satisfaction. The most important project in my life was no longer another bridge or skyscraper, but a small family that we were building in my loft. I thought we had finally found peace. But I forgot one of the basic rules of seismology: aftershocks always follow a strong earthquake. And the first of them was not long in coming. His name was Julian. We hadn't heard from him since he left Clara in that shabby motel. He'd vanished, as if he'd never been there. Clara filed for divorce, and since he didn't show up for court, they were divorced in absentia. We were sure he was out of our lives forever. We were wrong. He came as soon as Clara's name appeared in the press. The first was an email. Short, full of false remorse. "Clara, I've heard about your success. I'm so happy for you. I've always believed in your talent. I know I did a terrible thing. I was at my lowest point, and I didn't know what to do. Can I at least see Leo? He's my son." Clara showed me the letter. Her hands were shaking. "What should I do, Austin?" "Nothing," I answered harshly. "Delete it and forget it. He has no right to be in our lives. He gave up that right when he left you with $500. She listened. But Julian didn't back down. The calls started. The messages. He wrote that he missed Leo, that he wanted to make things right. He pressed her where it hurt most, her motherly heart and her natural inclination to forgive. Clara was distraught. "What if he's really changed?" she told me. "Leo needs to know his father." "He hasn't changed, Clara," I assured her. "He's seen you become successful and he wants to share in your success. This isn't remorse. This is calculation." I was right. When Julian realized that manipulation wasn't working, he changed his tactics. One evening, a courier rang our doorbell. He delivered a thick envelope. Inside were court papers. Julian was suing Clara, and the substance of his claim was so absurd and cynical that at first I couldn't believe my eyes. He wasn't simply demanding paternity and the right to see Leo. He wanted a share of the proceeds from the album Cracked Foundation. His lawyer, citing some vague precedent, argued that since the trauma of their joint bankruptcy had been the primary inspiration for Clara's music, Julian, as an accomplice to that trauma, was entitled to a share of the creative output. He was literally trying to monetize the pain he had inflicted on her. "He can't do that," Clara cried, her face turning white. "That's monstrous." "He might as well try," I said, feeling a cold fury boiling inside me. People like him are capable of anything. The news knocked Clara off her feet. Whatever light had been lit inside her began to fade again. She stopped composing. She became anxious again, sleeping poorly at night. The ghost of the past had returned and was trying to destroy everything we had worked so hard to build. I knew I had to act. I found the best family and copyright lawyer in Denver, a woman named Margaret Chin. She was known for her sharp wit and her toughness. I brought her all the documents. She studied them carefully, then looked at me over her glasses. Your ex-brother-in-law, Mr. Austin, she said calmly, is either very stupid or very arrogant. Most likely both. This lawsuit is pure extortion. We will destroy it. Margaret's words calmed Clara down a little, but the trial was still ahead. News of the lawsuit had leaked to the press. The tabloids seized on the story. Ex-husband demands money for suffering. Public opinion was on Clara's side, but the fact that she would have to face Julian again in the courtroom, to go through all the humiliation again, was torture for her. I was with her every step of the way. I went with her to meetings with her lawyer, helped her organize the facts, remembered the details. I became an engineer again, but this time I was designing the line of defense. On the day of the trial, Clara was pale, but dignified. Julian sat opposite. He had lost weight, looked shabby, but there was still the same smug confidence in his eyes. He must have truly believed in his case. His lawyer said a lot of beautiful words about creative symbiosis and shared experiences. Margaret Chin was a man of few words. She presented the evidence to the court, the note Julian had left behind, bank statements showing he had withdrawn the last of his money before disappearing, statements from the motel owner. And then she called me as a witness. Calmly and methodically, as if I were giving a project report, I recounted the evening I had found my sister and nephew. I described their condition, the squalid room, the fear in Clara's eyes. I described how Julian had left them destitute. When I had finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge, an elderly woman with tired eyes, looked at Julian without sympathy. The decision was handed down that same day. Julian's lawsuit was dismissed as frivolous and baseless. He was ordered to pay all of Clara's legal costs. He was allowed to see Leo only in the presence of a psychologist and after completing a course in parental responsibility. It was a complete and unequivocal victory. As we walked out of the courthouse, Clara took a deep breath, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "It's over," she whispered. "Yes," I said, hugging her. "We survived this aftershock." But I knew the ground beneath our feet was still unstable, and I feared that this was not the last time the past tried to destroy our present. We had barely had time to catch our breath after the legal battle with Julian when another cloud appeared on the horizon. This time it came from the direction we least expected it, although, on reflection, I should have seen it coming. The aftershock came from our parents. Since they had effectively disowned us on that phone call, we had not spoken. I had not called them, they had not called me. We existed in parallel universes. They, in their world of shiny facades and financial statements, and us, in ours, built on ruins but with a solid foundation of mutual support. But Clara's success, which had begun as an indie anecdote, was now a fact reported in national newspapers. Her name had become synonymous not just with talent but with commercial success. And money, I knew, was the only real measure of a person's worth to my parents. The first sign of this was a call from my mother. She didn't call me, but Clara directly. Clara was so surprised to see the name Mama on the screen that she handed the phone to me, confused. I turned on speakerphone. My mother's voice was filled with an unfamiliar, unctuous sweetness. "Clara, my dear, how are you? We're so worried about you. We read about you in Forbes, darling. It's incredible. Your father is so proud of you." Clara sat opposite me, and her face was written in bewilderment. Proud? The same father who called her music a hobby for millionaires' wives? "We'd like to visit you," my mother chirped. "To see Leo. We've missed our grandson so much. Can we come next weekend? We'll stay at the Four Seasons, of course. We don't want to inconvenience you." Clara looked at me with a silent question. I shook my head slightly. "Mom, I'm very busy right now," Clara said uncertainly. "I have a lot of work." "Of course, dear, we understand." Mother persisted. "But family is the most important thing. We just want to support you. Your father even talked to an old friend of his who runs an investment fund. He's ready to give you some advice on how to invest your income wisely, so that you don't make mistakes again." That last phrase, thrown out as if by accident, put everything in its place. They didn't want to support her. They wanted to control her. They didn't see her as a daughter, but as a successful asset that needed to be taken under control. Clara politely but firmly said that now was not the right time for a visit and ended the conversation. But her parents were not going to give up. They began an attack on all fronts. They gave interviews to some gossip magazine, telling how they always believed in their daughter's talent and supported her through the toughest times. My father told the financial magazine she gets her entrepreneurial spirit from me. She knows how to turn a crisis into an opportunity. I read this and felt sickened by their hypocrisy. They were trying to rewrite history, to refurbish their peeling facade of caring parents so they could bask in Clara's glory. They sent Leo expensive gifts, a huge teddy bear that didn't fit in his room, a little electric car that didn't work in our loft. This wasn't caring. It was a siege. The climax came when they arrived in Denver, unannounced. One Saturday afternoon, the intercom rang. I saw their faces on the screen, my father in a perfectly tailored cashmere coat, my mother in a mink coat, her hair impeccably coiffed. They looked like they were on an inspection tour of one of their properties. I couldn't help but let them in. They entered the loft, and their eyes immediately began scanning the space. I saw my mother glance with disgust at the children's toys scattered across the carpet. My father surveyed our furnishings with the air of an appraiser. "Nice," he said without any expression. "Very artistic." They had brought another expensive gift for Leo. He took it sheepishly, not understanding who these dressed-up strangers were. Clara came out to them. She was calm. The fragile girl they had once driven to despair was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth. "Why did you come?" she asked bluntly. "What do you mean?" "Why, my dear," the mother cooed. "To see you, my grandson. We are family." Family. Clara's voice was quiet, but there was a ring of steel in it. Family does not abandon its own in trouble. Family does not call your life a shame. Family does not tell you that you've made your own choice when you were standing on the edge of the abyss. The parents froze. Their masks of loving relatives slipped for a moment, revealing cold bewilderment. "Clara, don't be dramatic," her father interjected, trying to regain control of the situation. "We always wanted the best for you. Maybe we were too harsh, but we just wanted to motivate you." "You wanted me to live up to your expectations," Clara snapped. "I didn't, and you abandoned me. And now that I've become successful, not because of you, but in spite of you, you suddenly remembered that you have a daughter. I don't need your investment advice. I don't need your expensive gifts. I don't need your belated recognition. All I wanted from you then was a call. A simple call to say, 'Daughter, are you okay?' But you didn't." She walked over to Leo, who was huddled fearfully at my feet, and picked him up. "I appreciate you coming," she said evenly. "But we have to go. Leo is taking a nap." It was the politest way to send them out the door. They stood there, confused, unsure how to respond. Their script had not called for such a fight. They were used to their money and status opening doors. But the door to Clara's world, the world she had built herself, was closed to them. They left in silence, looking hurt. When the door closed behind them, Clara turned to me. Her eyes were shining, but she was smiling. "I did it," she whispered. "Yes," I said, hugging her and Leo. "You set boundaries. You protected our structure from outside interference. We had weathered that aftershock. Our edifice had held, and I knew it was stronger now." The battle with her parents was Clara's final act of liberation. She didn't just set boundaries. She tore down the old, rotten bridge that connected her to her toxic past and burned it to the ground. A new hardness appeared in her, the kind that I, as an engineer, value in materials, not fragility, but elasticity, the ability to withstand deformation and return to its original state. She threw herself into her work. The tour in support of the album began, first in America, then in Europe. I couldn't go with her for long. I had my own job, and Leo had to go to kindergarten. But I took on all the logistics, the organization, coordinating her team from Denver. We hired a wonderful nanny, a woman named Maria, who adored Leo, and I could rest easy for him. Clara called every day via video link. I saw her against the backdrop of different cities, Paris, Berlin, London. She looked tired, but happy. She talked about full houses, about people who came up to her after concerts with tears in their eyes and said that her music had changed their lives. She was no longer just my little sister who needed to be protected. She had become a force, a phenomenon. I led my own, quieter life. My days were scheduled down to the minute. Work, kindergarten, dinner with Leo, checking the working drawings, calling Clara. My loft, once a temple of minimalism, was now full of life. Leo's drawings hung on the walls. Construction kit parts were scattered on the floor. The air smelled of home-cooked food and happiness. I looked at all this and realized that I had never been so happy with my life. I had lost Isabella. I had lost the illusion of a perfectly planned future, but I had gained something much more valuable, a real family. One day, while Clara was on tour, the phone rang. It was Isabella. I hadn't heard her voice in over a year, and for a moment my heart skipped a beat. "Austin? Hello." Her voice was as calm and melodic as I remembered. She said she had seen a poster for Clara's concert in New York. where she was on a business trip. She said she was very happy for her. "You did the right thing, Austin," she said. "You chose family. You are a very good person." We talked for a few more minutes about work, about mutual friends. It was a polite, slightly detached conversation between two people whose paths had diverged. When I hung up, I felt neither regret nor longing, only peace. I knew that this chapter of my life was finally closed. I closed it without anger or resentment. I simply turned the page. Clara's tour had ended in triumph. She returned home tired but inspired. She brought Leo a bunch of presents and a whole notebook with sketches for a new album. We were together again, our little team of 3. One evening we were sitting on the couch. Leo was asleep in his room. Clara laid her head on my shoulder, like when she was a child. "Do you know what I've been thinking about this whole tour?" she asked quietly. "That none of this would have happened without you. You are my foundation, Austin. The strongest, most reliable." Her words touched me deeply. I, who had always sought solace in the strength of concrete and steel, suddenly realized that the most important structure I had ever built was the invisible structure of human relationships. It does not obey the laws of physics. It cannot be calculated on paper. Its strength is not measured in megapascals, but in trust, love, and the willingness to sacrifice oneself for the other. "We are each other's foundation," I answered. "You have given my life a meaning that I could not find in any blueprint." We decided that the loft was too small for us. We needed a real house, with a garden where Leo could play and a separate studio for Clara. We started looking, and we found it. It was not the ultramodern house in the foothills that I dreamed of with Isabella. It was an old brick house in a quiet area, with a large overgrown garden and huge windows. It needed serious renovation. The foundations needed to be strengthened, the roof needed to be replaced, the entire interior layout needed to be redone. For someone else, this would have been a headache. For me, this was a dream project. I quit my old job. I decided to open my own small engineering and construction company to have more freedom and time for my family. And my first project was our own house. Clara drew sketches. I turned them into working drawings. We worked together as a perfect team. She was responsible for beauty, I was for durability. It was our common cathedral. We decided not to sell the loft. It became Clara's studio and my office. It was a monument to our past, the place where our new life had begun. It was too important to give up. The lawsuits were over. Julian was no longer in our lives. My parents, too, had fallen silent, perhaps realizing that their tactics had not worked. We were free. There was a lot of work ahead, a lot of sleepless nights over drawings and estimates, a lot of construction dust and noise. But it was joyful work. We were not just building a house. We were building our future. Stone by stone, beam by beam. We were making final assessments of the strength of our structure. And I knew that it would withstand any hurricane, because we were building it together. A year passed. A year filled with the sounds of not only the cello, but also construction tools. Our new house was slowly but surely being transformed. I personally supervised every stage, from pouring the new foundation to installing the last window. I knew every screw, every joint in the structure. Clara was engaged in design, turning empty boxes of rooms into a cozy space full of light and air. Leo, who was 6, watched the work with delight, bringing me imaginary tools and declaring himself the chief assistant engineer. This was our common project, and it brought us even closer. I opened my own company. At first it was difficult. There were few orders, but the reputation of a good engineer spreads quickly. I took on difficult projects that others refused: restoration of old buildings, strengthening of emergency structures. I like to give new life to what others considered hopeless. This became my professional philosophy. I did not just build new, I saved the old. Clara recorded a second album. It was completely different. It no longer had the heartbreak of cracked foundation. It was light, peaceful, full of complex but harmonious melodies. She called it The House That Austin Built. When she showed me the title, I couldn't say anything for a long time. It was the most precious gift I had ever received. The album was a huge success, cementing her status as one of the most interesting contemporary composers. Our life entered a calm, happy course. In the mornings we had breakfast together, then I took Leo to school and Clara went to her studio in the loft. In the evenings we gathered for dinner, discussed the past day, read books to Leo before bed. Sometimes, when he fell asleep, Clara took the cello and played for me. In these moments, I felt absolute, complete happiness. One day, sorting through old papers, I came across a folder with plans for the house that Isabella and I were planning. I looked at these cold, impeccable lines, at the glass walls and minimalist interiors, and felt nothing but detachment. It was a plan for someone else's life, someone else's dream. I silently threw it in the trash. My life no longer resembled a perfect plan. It was more like our old brick house, with some unevenness, with history, with the patina of time, but incredibly durable, warm, and alive. It was filled with laughter, music, the smell of freshly baked goods and construction dust. And it was beautiful in its imperfection. My parents no longer tried to contact us. I heard from distant relatives that they had sold their huge house in Denver and moved to Florida, to a gated elite retirement community. They had chosen their own path, the path of isolation in a sterile world of wealth and loneliness. I did not feel sorry for them. I simply stopped thinking about them. They were like an old, failed project that had been filed away and forgotten. On the day of our official move into the new house, Clara surprised me. When I entered the living room, she was sitting in the middle of the room with a cello. She played a new composition for me. Short, simple, but incredibly light. "What is this?" I asked. "It's a drawing," she smiled. "A drawing of our future." I sat on the floor next to her. Leo pressed himself against me on the other side. The sun was setting outside, filling the room with golden light. I looked at my sister, my nephew, the walls of the house we had built together, and I knew that my life as an engineer and as a person had found its greatest meaning. I no longer looked for strength in concrete and steel. I found it in love, in resilience, in the ability to forgive and build again. I realized that the most reliable structures are not those that never crack, but those that, when they crack, find the strength not to collapse, but to become even stronger. Our foundation had stood the test of time, and I knew that now we could build anything on it, even a skyscraper. But we just needed a house. Our house. And we built it.